Wrapping up another week on One Soccer today with Jordan Wilson and Gareth Wheeler. I am Adam Jenkins, and in the A block today, gentlemen, heavy Canadian men's national team coverage. There are a wide variety of stories that we are going to get into today. Some of the old school vintage, a recurring favorite or recurring nightmare perhaps at times, and some moves for our national team players. But let's dive in with the headline. Unfortunately, it is on the unfortunate end of the spectrum, and that is the recurring drama for Ismaël Koné at Marseille. It has not gone particularly well with the relationship between player and coach, and this statement from Roberto De Zerbi made some headlines. Koné is probably going to leave, the coach said through a translator. It is a choice the club made. We wanted this player. He's very strong. He's a good lad. But over the last few months, he hasn't shown me that he's capable of being part of this project. He's got a lot of competition. Jordan Wilson, we always preface these quotes by saying sometimes English translated can lose a little nuance. It can feel harsher than it is, but this one is pretty clear that it's time for a fresh start for Ismaël Koné.
Yeah, De Zerbi, Ismaël Koné has fallen out of favor with De Zerbi, and this happens in football all the time. Wheels, you've seen it countless times. I've seen it. I've been a part of situations where I think a player is a baller and the coach maybe just doesn't rate him or doesn't feel like he's a part of the future at that club, or he keeps making the same mistakes that a coach wants him to rectify, and it just doesn't happen. Ismaël Koné is a baller, but he still has a lot to learn. Keep in mind, this is a player that hasn't been a pro for more than 4 years. Like, he needs to, that rapid rise sometimes maybe needs to find a steady home and a place to play. And it looked nice on paper to be with Marseille and to be playing in Ligue 1 and with that Quebec base that he has in terms of the language and all that, but maybe that's just not the fit for him. And that's okay, but I know he's going to land somewhere where he's going to be playing and developing. And for me, the real thing is just being in a position where he's playing week in and week out. So when he comes to play for Canada, he can be the player that we need. When you look at this team and the players that were stepping up, he's been overshadowed a bit by Moise Bambito because he just took off and he's like, he's a Rolls Royce in the back and how the game is now with defenders and that size. But Koné was the talk going into the World Cup, at the World Cup, coming back as well. And that potential is still there. He just needs to find the right home to really make that stick.
I really like Roberto De Zerbi as a manager, but I really do not like how he's handled this situation. Ismaël Koné can be a special player. It's an inexperienced player with bags of talent that I just don't think is being handled the right way. Let's start off with his move to Watford. This was my problem at the time. I said it on this show. He was going to a club that recycles manager like I change my pants on a weekly basis. He had 3 different managers in just over a season and a half at Watford. That doesn't help a young player with stability. Remember, he only played 1 year at CF Montreal as a professional. Now he makes a move to Ligue 1. He goes into Marseille camp injured, and he never got his sea legs. Part of that might be on the player. It sounds like, according to De Zerbi, it's the training techniques. It's the professionalism that's lacking. But still, a 22-year-old player with not a whole lot of talent trying to make that jump to the next level, sometimes you need a manager just to put your arm around the player and not say things in a public perspective and protect the player in the moment. That simply hasn't been the case. I understand De Zerbi tactically just absolutely masterful. He comes from the Premier League. He understands what it takes from his players in order to be a champion. And he said it with Marseille. They're trying to push PSG right now for a potential league title. Unfortunately, he just doesn't have the patience for a young player. So if and when Koné does move on, he needs a club that understands that it's just not going to happen just like this, and that you're going to maybe need to approach the scenario with understanding and kindness. I mean, he played 46 games last season at Watford. That's an incredible amount of football. I just think that a level of understanding is required with young players, and a young player that does not simply have a whole lot of experience. So now it's incumbent on his national team teammates, Jesse Marsh, individuals like this, to help the player learn the way, go down the right path, but do so in a way with understanding and kindness. And I simply don't think that this is the way that he's being treated at Marseille.
To add to Wheels' point, I think feeling good has a lot to do with your product on the pitch. Like if you know that you're getting scolded by a manager, if you know if you do one thing wrong, you're going to be on the bench, you're shackled. A player like Ishmael Koné needs to be a bit free. Yeah, I totally agree with Wheels in terms of he's still young and he's proven what he can do, but he's still green. But it's also very overbearing when you have someone kind of breathing over your shoulder. And I understand this is professional football and there are demands and people's jobs are on the line. I get that. But in terms of that player specifically, having an environment where he knows he can maybe make a little bit of a mistake and still be encouraged, that's probably the environment that Ishmael Koné will thrive under. But this from De Zerbi from the beginning, to Wheels' point, it just wasn't one that he could flourish with.
What surprises me is that they've elected that he's not part of the project going forward. Like that's a direct quote. The fact that a player who unquestionably has the talent over the course of 5 or 6 months has ruled him out in terms of the long-term approach of the project, that surprises me. That may come back to bite Marseille at some point, but that's incumbent on the player and his agents to give him good advice and to find the proper landing spot for him right now. He needs a right environment to go and thrive in. So it's incumbent on his agents, the people around him, to find him the right place to go. So this untapped potential that I think everyone sees, it comes to fruition. So it's not just on Koné here, it's the people around him that really need to make the right decision.
It certainly might help the next team, the prospective club, come in and get him at under the market value, but at least we believe Koné is worth. Speaking of market value, the most expensive Canadian player, Canada's most internationally known superstar, Alphonso Davies. We love talking about him. The viewers love listening to any kind of content around Alphonso Davies. He is that type of presence. He's also the captain of our Canadian men's national team. He also has a bit of a history with these little lingering niggles that seem to keep him out of action, and they pop up at the most inopportune time. After it seemed like Alphonso Davies and his team were about to put pen to paper on an extension with Bayern Munich, the next bit of news was not that a contract was signed, but it was rather that Alphonso Davies had to leave a match through injuries. It was the UEFA Champions League, a match against Feyenoord. He was sidelined for the time being. That was the initial quote from FC Bayern on X. That has since been updated, that being the timeline, to 4 to 6 weeks with the strain. Now, by my math, we are just under 8 weeks away from CONCACAF Nations League semi-final play. Of course, Canadian supporters will be hoping that 4 to 6 weeks is maybe on the conservative end of a diagnosis, a prognosis for recovery, and that will allow Davies to be back and ready to go for Mexico. But the question, I assume, Gareth, that many people are wondering is what is going on with Davies and why do these little strains and niggles seem to keep popping up? Should this be something that Canadian football fans are concerned about?
It's notable. This is the 13th injury that he's experienced since joining Bayern Munich back in 2018. That's a considerable number of injuries. Some of them, like COVID, the heart issue, I'm going to take that out of the equation. What we've seen as of late, and this is the last few years, is that these muscle injuries keep on coming about, like hamstring, thigh issues. And that tells me that this is a player who's potentially being overworked a little bit. I look at Davies as being a Ferrari, and he needs to be treated as such. Not every player on the planet is going to be able to go out there and play 90 minutes multiple times a week, game in, game out, be readily available. Some players need to be handled with care. And I think that Davies kind of fits that bill. I'm not suggesting that he hasn't been completely durable. Like there's other players who are much, much more injury prone than Alphonso Davies, but perhaps the way that Bayern Munich approached the player needs to be tinkered to a certain degree. Like he's playing 90 minutes in games that are done and dusted for Bayern Munich. Like it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me all the time. So I just think that it needs to be managed. I think that it's important to Alphonso Davies to be readily available for his national team as well. That's part of being the captain. That's part of the responsibility that comes along with it, that you're relied upon. You're expected to show up and be fit and ready to go. This isn't alarming to me. I think it's more frustrating, more so than anything else. His style of play, the way that he's built, like Jordan's probably played with players over the course of his career. Like, different individuals are built in different ways. Davies is special in so many ways, but I just think that he needs to be handled with care a little bit more by the clubs the club that he plays for.
He needs to be handled
Jordan
with
Wilson.
care. Absolutely, he does. Like, that's a fact. And Wheels are so right. When games are done and dusted, but managers are reluctant at times to change defenders and want to keep that back 4 or 5 and keep that stability going throughout your campaign. But you look at Davies, I always joke and say he's too fast for his own body. And there's some truth to that, like with the twitch fibers and all the things you could say, the way that he jerks. But he is being overworked. And this is not just a Bayern Munich Alphonso Davies problem. This is like a world football problem. And we can't ignore it. And I hate revisiting it, but it is a fact. How many games that these clubs and teams are playing, how important these games are as well. It's not just, I want to do well in the league. You have so many tournaments, cups, everything that's happening, and then also world football and international football as well. It's a lot. A guy like Alphonso Davies, he's going to get injured at times because of the way that he plays and the sprints that he has to do. He's not a player that, for me, I play down the spine. Sometimes you can cheat as a center midfielder. Make sure you get to that spot quick and coast. He's doing the most sprints every match, up and down. That's a part of his game. And that is also why at times he might be feeling great and he might be feeling ready to go. But that one little reach or that one little sprint, that's just what does him. And then you get these 4 to 6 weeks. So managing him, the Ferrari, a bit better, will probably minimize those situations moving forward.
Yeah. And Jordan's right. Like, again, this isn't an Alphonso Davies issue exclusively. I get all the games in world football here, and this isn't a Bayern Munich problem exclusively either. I think there needs to be an adjustment. As long as players want to earn more money and salaries continue to go up, the game is more and more expensive for the average supporter or fan to consume. This is the trade-off. There's going to be more games, more commitment that clubs and players need to make. The thing that needs to be done to compensate all of this is bigger squads and managers who have deep enough squads where they trust proper squad rotation. Need to go deeper. That's why there's 5 substitutes that are made. Like, we're back, when I started watching the game, I sound like an old man now. Like, substitutions simply weren't made. Then it went to 3. Now it's at 5. Like, the treatment of these players is better. The equipment's better. The pitches are better. Like, everything's better. But now it's incumbent on managers to rotate their squads and rotate their players and just not rely upon few. You need to rely upon many these days.
Well, according to FBref.com, Alphonso Davies, since basically Halloween, October the 30th, a DFB Pokal match in the round of 32. That was the last time he played less than an hour. In fact, he has not played less than 79 minutes since that match. 12 games over that span. It's a lot of football for such an important piece to both club and country's future in Bayern and Canada's perspective. Gareth, I suppose this is something that every time it happens, Canadian supporters are going to squint and look away, but the timeline is at least reassuring that it should give him at least 2 weeks at the very least to get ready for CONCACAF Nations League. Do want to give some love to Jayden Nelson, as it was reported first by Emmanuel Veth and then Tom Bogert that the Vancouver Whitecaps have signed the attacker. The 22-year-old who has been capped 5 times is expected to join the team in preseason at some point over the next week. That means we could very well see him against Saprissa, Gareth. What do you make of this move? It seems like one of those, gone are the days where a move to MLS was seen as a lateral or backwards move. You're seeing Corbin, who come back to Major League Soccer, of course, Adekubi, now Nelson, and these players are going to play.
The problem is players like this are coming back because they've kind of run out of options, or their careers have stalled or been hit on pause in terms of their European adventure. Look, I've known Jayden Nelson since he was a teenager coming through the Toronto FC Academy. His skill and talent and pace, all of that has been undeniable. And when he first made the move from Toronto FC to Rosenborg, he hit the ground running. He was really good in that first season. But since, for whatever reason, and some of it might be the individual, some might be the squads that he's been playing for, his European career kind of fizzled out. Rosenborg, who has some really good players, by the way, in Norway, just kind of fell out of favor, went to the second Bundesliga. What kind of level is that? And he hasn't played a game since October 20th and never played more than 45 minutes at a club where he was supposed to be a player that was going to bring in that attacking prowess that they sorely needed. So this, for me, is a disappointment that he couldn't make it work in Europe. Now, he needs to play. He's 22 years of age. He needs to show that he's reliable. I think that reliability is the thing that's been holding him back. And perhaps you can find that in the Vancouver Whitecaps. So for the player, I think it's a move that he had to make. For the Vancouver Whitecaps, was this the best way to allocate the little money that they do have to invest in their squad? I'm not sure. Like, this seems to be a move that you're hoping that a young player comes good. You see the potential in him and you can take that forward. I understand it's very much kind of a CF Montreal move, in fairness, but the Whitecaps are in a position where I think they need to win now. Is Nelson capable of stepping in and playing that Fafa Picault role or adding to an attack that I think needs much more punch? I think that remains to be seen, Adam. I still think that the player needs to go on, improve it. On surface level, the move makes sense. I really hope it works out. I do like the player. I do think he has potential, but now he needs to show that he's ready to take that next step.
And according to Tom Bogert, not alone a full signing for Vancouver Whitecaps. So as mentioned, when we get there to CONCACAF Champions Cup, we could very well see Nelson make his debut with the Caps. It won't be a debut in Champions Cup, but rather a return in Champions Cup for Mo Babouli. It was announced yesterday that the former Forge man, Syrian international, and also former captain of the Nine Stripes, has crossed the 905 Derby lines again and will suit up in orange. Jordan Wilson, not quite seismic, because I think for some people, especially those who know Mo and know his hunger and desire to win, but certainly a shock to York United supporters. Maybe it would have been less of a shock if that photo didn't leak with Brian Wright and Mo Babouli training with Forge, if we've had some time to process this, but I digress. What do you make of the move?
Yeah, I think everyone could see it coming. I think if you know Mo Babouli and you see him play and you see the way that he was, even when I played with him in 2022 at York United, he is a Forge player that came back into the league and played for York United. And I know he was leading the lines and he was captain, but everything about him, the fact that he's familiar with the setup, the fact that he's familiar with Bobby Smirnionis and players, just always makes Forge enticing. I think when you look at this situation, the best way I could describe it is sometimes mom and dad might bicker, and maybe there's a little separation on the table. But then you look at it and they come together and make up. This is what happened with Mo Babouli and Forge. It's like they maybe left and it was one of those things, I want to try something new and go to greener pastures or be different. Then comes back and we got him for a steal at York United and then played there for probably longer than anyone expected. I didn't think he would play out the 3 years. Then now he has an option to move and he's like, you know what? I really enjoy my time there and I want to go and play for championships. I want to go play in CONCACAF Champions Cup. So why not go back to the place where I've had all that success and a lot of fun? So it makes sense. But if you're a York United fan, you're kicking a can down the street because your two best players just go to the rivals down the QEW, and that must hurt.
Yeah, it should hurt because this is a dream move for Mo Babouli and it's a dream move for Forge. On his day, when he's at it, few are better in the Canadian Premier League, if any, than Mo Babouli. He can be that good. At times for York United, because they didn't have the depth that Forge have in their team of top talent, that sometimes he was asked to do things a little bit more than maybe he should. He had a lot of responsibility on his shoulders. Now it's being taken off. Now he's playing in a team full of quote-unquote star players, guys like Kyle Becker who are used to carrying the mail. So maybe on a day where he isn't an 8.5 out of 10 and it's not going on, Forge have other options. So Babouli can kind of pick his spots a little bit more and be an impact player in a different kind of way. I just look at that Forge team, the players in it. You add Babouli, another difference maker to the equation. Look out. Mo Babouli, Mo problems for the rest of the Canadian Premier League when it comes to Forge.
I will never forget Jordan Wilson's debut on One Soccer. While we're giving him a trial before we really got to use his relationship metaphor, before we really engaged in some nuptials with Jordan Wilson, he said Mo Babouli was the best player in the Canadian Premier League
People thought I was
then,
crazy.
and there has been little to suggest that, as Gareth mentions, on his day, he can be that player again, certainly reuniting with some old friends, which means what we're going to show you next is not completely new. In some ways, it's going to feel familiar. But yesterday, after we taped the show, we were starting to think about what Forge might look like for this match against Monterrey, what a starting 11 could look like based on what has been announced, based on some of the reporting from Oliver Platt and peers. And I can also say that they're not done adding. There's a couple more pieces on the way. But to this point, we can show you this for what Forge could look like when they take to the pitch hosting Monterrey. Let's go from the back, a 4-2-3-1. We do not need to be married to a formation, but look at this. Awolabi Bello, Ashniyoti Janssen, Nimic, and Rama as a potential back four. Becker and Aliman Cisse in a double pivot could throw Noah Jensen in there and move Cisse to a right back if needed. And then this is where it gets exciting. The spine from York United still wearing their old green and white striped shirts. Babouli and Wright at the 10 and 9. Borges and Chouanier on the sides if Jelani Smith and Bobby Smirniotis do not continue to tinker. I guess it's just a simple question of how much damage could this group do, Gareth Wheeler? And do you think Monterrey, not that they're going to come in not as the favorites, that's ridiculous, but depending on weather, depending on who they send, could this be a closer tie than you think? By my understanding, Forge hasn't conceded in preseason football yet.
I'm looking at that starting 11, and that 11 is probably better than the team that played last season, and definitely better than the 11 that played in the Canadian Premier League final. They lose Matusala, they lose Hujabrapor, but Aliman Cisse barely kicked the ball last season. And then Dan Nimic, a different type of player than Matusala, who was injured in the Canadian Premier League final. And it all starts at the top. They have a number 9 in Brian Wright to lead the line and balance in that team. Think about players that aren't on that list. Jensen and Poma. You can make cases for both of those players being in a starting 11 as well. And it probably even goes deeper than that. That Forge team looks scary on paper. Now, when it comes to the Champions Cup, with all due respect to Forge and how strong that team is, Monterrey is an excellent side. They're playing one of the top sides in Liga MX here, okay? So temper your expectations because of all that. Monterrey's in season, top side. But that Forge team is in a better position to play competitive football in the CONCACAF Champions Cup than the team that went into it. For me, a little bit thin, a little bit ill-prepared heading into last CONCACAF Champions Cup campaign. On paper, I like it. We'll see who's fit. We'll see what other players come in. But that's a pretty impressive potential starting 11.
Pragmatic Uncle Wheels. Jordan Wilson, don't temper your expectations. Could that Forge team beat Monterrey in February?
I think they could definitely give them a run for sure. But I think when you look at this match, obviously we don't need to say what everyone knows. Is like the fact that this is going to be Forge's first game, and Monterrey are giants and also in form in its season. It makes it difficult. I just like the fact that when you look at Forge last season, you kind of knew who was going to play and what formation they would play. And now, like, Wheels, they might even make you happy and do a 4-4-2 at times. Like, why not put Babouli and right up there with that chemistry that they have? Why not put a Noah Jensen, who's been there and chomping at the bit, and who would be a regular starter if Hujabrapor didn't do such a dang good job in the midfield? Like, now, if you're Bobby Smirniotis, you're looking at this team, and there's guys that you know, but you can rearrange and put things in different places with a Nimic in the back as well. You could even do things with 3, but I just look at the attacking prowess. We put, and in the graphic there, you have Tristan Borges on the wing, and he could very well play there. But you know what could easily happen? Him and Mo Babouli can look at each other and say, nah, let's switch for 15 minutes. Let's just, let me go and get in the midfield. I want to get on the ball, and Mo can just run ragged. What right back wants to mark either Mo Babouli and then a switch and Tristan Borges for 90 minutes? That is not a fun day. So Forge has options in attacking, and this is what they do. That was a weakness for them last season. That's the reason why they lost to Calvary, or they really couldn't compete in the last game of the season, because they didn't have an attack. And now they've added.
Just looking at that, Jordan, maybe what the team still needs, because the future of Daniel Parra, not on that list, very much up in the air. We don't expect them to return. We'll see. They could use a left back that can get forward and attack a little bit more. It was such a position of strength for them last season. Oluwabi Belawu is versatile. He can play left side of center back. If you bring in another center back or left back, then you can push Ashinodi Janssen into the Hajarapur role as a holding midfielder. So I still think they're a couple pieces away from the puzzle being completed, but that nucleus, that base that they're building from, looks pretty damn good.
Yeah, and you could even experiment with some of those positions of potential adding before announcements, I suppose, before a ball is kicked. You go to a 3 and you let Oluwabi Belawu play in a 3, add a player who can play as a wing back. We know Cisse can do that. They are adding the pieces to allow them to be flexible, versatile, and dangerous. And I know if you're not excited to see Forge play football, you're at least curious to see how it will look in CONCACAF Champions Cup. A quick word, Gareth, and we will spend a larger period of time once all of the rosters are done. But it's undeniable this offseason that there is a lot of intra-Canadian Premier League transfers from Halifax to York, the return of the GTA players, from the players who are going back to Pacific, from across the Strait of Georgia. There's a lot of moves within the league. Is that something that surprises you? Is that something that concerns you? Where are you on this now, knowing that once the rosters are finalized, we'll have a really big conversation about this?
I'm good with it because these familiar faces, players across the Canadian Premier League, have proved that they can play to a certain standard. And why replace really solid Canadian players with the potential of becoming better, or maybe even being a better fit on a different team than bringing in players from elsewhere and you're keeping your fingers crossed that the move might work out? Canadian Premier League sides need to make sure that the foreign imports, the players that you're bringing from elsewhere, are top players that can really add to the team, and don't fall into the trap of just getting a USL player just for the sake of it. I mean, the Valesky story in Halifax last year was an absolute nightmare. A player with pedigree in the USL simply couldn't cut it in the Canadian Premier League. You want to avoid those situations. So I think making moves within the league makes sense for these Canadian Premier League clubs because you know these players, you know their persona, and you know how they might fit into your team.
If you play teams so many times too, Adam, you play them 4 times, probably 5 times throughout the season, and every time you're looking at a player and you're like, oh, if I played with him or if he was on our team, this is what would happen. This is what York United's doing as well. You're seeing players that are local coming home because you know what it's like when they're playing in front of family and friends. I know that firsthand. It's like playing in front of your dad or your brother and sister. It just gives you that motivation to not mess up, definitely for home games, because they're on you and they're breathing and they're close. So you like that. This happens in leagues all across the world, right? It's like players make a move to rival clubs or to the team down the road. It happens. And I like that's happening in the CPL as well. They are proven, just like what we all said.
All right, more to watch as the CPL offseason continues. But for today, it's time to get to the Tonybet top picks. Tonybet top picks. Looking ahead to the weekend, let's start with Premier League outright winners. Liverpool minus 400, Arsenal plus 466, Manchester City plus 2434. These are futures, gentlemen. Lift the trophy. What say you, Mr. Wheeler?
Yeah, these are outrights to win the Premier League title. It's Liverpool's. I mean, minus 400, you can't make that bet. Arsenal are the only other side that could maybe come up and beat them. But as Patrice Evra said, Arsenal are like Netflix. It's always about what's coming up next season. So, and with no Saka for the time being, that's a big loss for Arsenal as well. So no bet for me, just no value to be had.
I hate that I spat out my drink when I heard Patrice Evra say that. And it was so true and it was so funny. As an Arsenal fan, it hurt. But like, man, all the jokes that have truth in it are the ones that really hit you.
Jordan Wilson, let's see if we can get an outright winner from you with La Liga. Madrid minus 189, Barca plus 333, Atleti plus 450.
Look, I wouldn't bet against Hala Madrid. No chance. Is there a case for Barca? Yeah, for sure. But if I'm going to put my money on who's winning, Galacticos.
I'm going to make the case for Atletico Madrid. 8-0-2, the hottest team in the league in their last 10. They've only lost once in their last 17 in all competitions. At plus 450, that's worth a punt.
Ooh.
One Soccer Today, another fantastic week with the boys. We'll be back on Monday for more. Thanks for joining us. And remember, stay locked right here on One Soccer.